Hi, and welcome to an exceptionally exciting episode of Yachting Canada. Don't think it gets more Canadian than what we're talking about today. We're kind of got a Canadian hockey hat trick going on. We're in Lunenburg, Nova Scotia. I'm Adam Langley. I have Amanda Langley. We're with Yachting International Radio with Shipyard East Coast, and we have Captain Phil Watson from Bluenose II, Canada's sailing ambassador. So we're in Lunenburg, Nova Scotia, a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
That's number one for the hat trick.
We're in the historic Lunenburg Shipyard.
2,
We're on Bluenose II.
3.
And the bonus is we have the OG of Bluenose II.
The OG.
Captain Phil Watson. Captain, thank you so much for joining us
welcome.
today.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. It's just such a pleasure to have you on this podcast. Perhaps you could open it up, though. For a lot of our listeners, they might not be familiar with Bluenose, the story of Bluenose, and Lunenburg, and how that Bluenose story evolved into Bluenose II, and which is under your command for now 38 years.
Yeah, well, not my command for 38. I've been on board since 1987. I started as a deckhand and climbed my way up through the ranks, and yeah.
Excellent.
So if you're looking at how the Bluenose came to be. On the coast here in the sort of mid 1700s, they started developing schooners, probably loosely based on a Dutch design from previous. And the prevailing wind here is southwest. So you need a boat that'll be weatherly to windward as well as going downwind. So the big square riggers that you would traditionally see are basically downwind vessels, and they're going to follow the trade winds and follow those routes. So for small coastal work, fore and aft makes much more sense.
Right.
So going out initially on the coast and then eventually to the Grand Banks, schooners were the workhorses, particularly of Nova Scotia, carrying people and goods around, and fishing inshore. And then as they started fishing offshore, obviously the boats got bigger and bigger and bigger.
Right.
You go out to the Grand Banks, you fish codfish. First back to the market gets the best value.
Okay, so
Obviously,
it's fast.
It's pretty simple. Yes.
Right.
Obviously 2 boats going in the same direction is always a race. Who's going to go faster? That's pretty standard.
That hasn't changed.
Yes,
Always a
has not
race.
changed. So in 1920, there was an America's Cup race canceled for 20 knots of wind. As
for 20 knots, they canceled the race.
They canceled the race, and
okay.
So these guys that sailed these boats said, well, we need a race for real sailors.
Right.
So Keith McLaren wrote a great book about the history of the racing of the Grand Banks schooners, and that was what he titled the book, was A Race for Real Sailors.
I love that.
Yeah.
So that's what Canadians are.
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
So they had a best American against best Canadian, and the Americans won in 1920.
Okay.
So the Canadians could not stand that, couldn't live with that. So the answer to that was to hire a young naval architect by the name of Will Ruey, based in Halifax, and he designed a ship called the Bluenose. So Bluenose is a traditional name for Nova Scotians. So he designed that. She won the race in 1921, and where the race is, it was raced in series, and she never lost.
She's undefeated.
1938. So,
Wow.
Yeah. So it's a big thing, and it's a really interesting part of history. When you look in the 1920s, they were already taking 400-foot steamships through the Welland Canal. The age of sail was really, really waning.
Right.
But it was a great sort of just a period in history where you had the story of man against ocean. There were a ton of Canadians living in the Boston area. A lot of the trade was north-south. So it was families against each other. And it was big. And then they had the sort of the social media of the time that they could film these big racehorses of the sea.
Right.
And broadcast it. So it was huge, as big as the Super Bowl or.
Can you imagine them today doing that, though?
Yes, they do it. They do it. They race the big mega yachts.
No, but I mean the social media capabilities.
Yes,
Can you imagine if we could go back?
Yes.
Well, that was sort of the heyday of the Gloucester fleet versus the Atlantic or the Nova Scotia schooner fleet, and the rivalries must have been intense.
Oh, I think so.
That spirit, though, I think remains here in Lunenburg, and it's obviously channeled through Bluenose as our sailing ambassador for Canada.
Yes.
We like to call her our own here in Nova Scotia, but it's Canada's sailing ambassador.
And Lunenburg's the home port for the Bluenose.
Yes.
But it travels all around.
Yes.
So.
Yeah.
Well, it's I think it's have in my pocket here even Bluenose profile on our Canadian currency.
This is how
So,
iconic
Yeah.
Bluenose is.
Now it's a big ship, and we had to put it on our smallest currency. That's our Canadian dime, but it has been on the dime for my lifetime.
Yeah.
And
It's
it's
1937, I think. She came on the dime. Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Wow.
It's just so
Yes,
iconic.
yeah.
We're just so excited
So
to be
the
here today.
dime, Canadian stamps. Captain Angus, the original master, is in the Canadian Sports Hall of Fame, and the ship is in the Sports Hall of Fame. It's one of the only non-personal
That's incredible.
things that's there.
So cool.
Has been inducted, and
So its achievements are endless, but it is its greatest achievement, I believe, and for us personally as Nova Scotians, is that pride that it generates in where we're from, in our seafaring past, our connection to the ocean. Perhaps you could talk a bit about what inspired you to become a seafarer.
yeah. Actually, we were talking about that in the office this morning. I started sailing here locally as a kid, so 10 years old. There used to be for a year I did sailing, what's now Atlantica, the resort in Western Shore.
Okay.
And then Lunenburg Yacht Club, I spent some years there. And then when I was 16, I sort of bothered my way onto a 75-foot schooner called Rain Dancer.
Bothered your way?
Bothered
I
my
like
way.
that.
My brother and I would go and they were at the wharf in Mahone Bay where I grew up, and my brother and I would go see the captain every day. And they were going up into the Great Lakes, and called my mom and said, we need one more guy, and does Phil want to go? And so I went, and have been hooked on schooners ever since.
Wow.
That was sort of my first seagoing experience. And
I think when you're from this area, that passion is kind of instilled in you it's all around you.
it is.
Yeah.
And it's, I'm an immigrant here. I was my parents brought me to Canada when I was a kid,
Where-
little kid. We're
where
from
from?
the UK.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so, we grew up, you're sitting in the barber shop in Mahone Bay with the board across the arms, and listening to the old boys talk about rum running, and
Love that.
So it just sort of gets in your soul at an early age.
Yeah.
I think we can
Absolutely.
appreciate that.
It's that whole saying, salt in your blood.
Yes.
Well, and I think that's a really interesting segue into our next question, because Bluenose II behaves as a sail training vessel of sorts for youth and for young people looking to get into the marine environment.
Which is sort of how you became involved in this too.
Yes,
So
yeah.
it's full circle.
It is full circle indeed.
Yeah. So, can you talk to us a little bit about that experience being the captain of a Bluenose, and how important it is to cultivate marine trades and get people involved and working in the marine environment?
For sure. We've had lots of young people go through here and end up, pilots or engineers or deck officers, and some have gone on yachts, and so Bluenose, we are a very entry level job. So for young people to come here from all across Canada, there's no experience required.
They have to be Canadian.
They have to be Canadian. They have to be over 19.
And they can have never been on a boat
Never
before.
been on a boat.
Okay.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So we often joke that, public speaking and furniture refinishing would be a much better job reference to come here. Because we do.
Because there's a lot of woodwork.
Yes, there's a lot of woodwork.
And you speak to the public every day.
We speak to the public. So, last year we had 60,000 people walk across the decks. We took 7,000 people sailing.
So that's important. So Bluenose does operate as an ambassador for the province, and that it does annual sailing schedules around Atlantic Canada and beyond. But and in that you're describing more than just the boat. You're talking about Nova Scotia. And perhaps you want to elaborate a bit on that, how that's
Yeah. So what is it about Nova Scotia? And we're in Lunenburg right now. So
Yes.
with that lens, what do you think what makes it so appealing to people, marine visitors particularly?
I think we're still tied to the sea.
Yeah.
As we move into the future, you can see we're slowly turning inland, but I think largely we are tied to the sea. Whether you're looking at the big port in Halifax, or the external ports in Sheet Harbour or Sydney, we're still tied drastically to the sea, right? So I still think that history, and people still appreciate their history. I love coming into Lunenburg, particularly because it's a magnet for visitors here.
So colorful and
with
charming.
with the museum and all the tourist industry that's around. But we can go to places like Pictou or Yarmouth or wherever, And then we're taking history back to the people.
Right.
So I know that, it becomes sort of a town meeting place, and that we'll meet people on the deck that will tell us about their history, about the time that sail was important to them when their grandfathers were fishing under sail, or and then I know, and then they'll have those conversations among themselves, just standing on the deck. And I know that conversation is going to be carried on in the post office and in the grocery store, and right.
It's like a giant icebreaker.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't mean that literally.
No,
because I don't think we're going to take Bluenose icebreaking.
No, but it's cool. You see young kids come and they're running around the boat, and then they're sitting there. Maybe their grandfathers brought them down, and then so they're getting those stories and they're learning about their own history, and the Bluenose becomes the thing that sort of sparks that conversation.
Love that.
Yeah.
Because the schooners went into all these ports, all along Nova Scotia.
Of course.
Whether they were carrying cabbages from Tancook or taking mining equipment up to Goldboro, or there's all kinds of things that the schooners used to do, and it's part of the history of Nova Scotia.
I know marine visitors really love coming into ports like Lunenburg, where it's a working waterfront.
Yes.
They feel like they're going back in time a little bit. They're still part of that maritime world that probably drew them to this industry in the first place.
Yes.
But some places have sort of lost that lens, that luster.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's the lovely thing about coming to Nova Scotia, if you're coming on a yacht, is that you can come into Lunenburg and all the services you need are here.
I know.
Right?
Yeah.
You've got whatever you want: sailmakers, machine shops.
It's like an old school shopping mall.
Yes,
It's like the old general store.
Yes.
But just way beyond that.
Yes, yeah. But then, you can go up the Eastern Shore or into the Bordor Lakes, and you can go back into wild Nova Scotia and travel, largely untraveled places, and be by yourself and sort of get away from it. And, you can go to Cape Breton and see wild horses on the beach and see the Highlands, or in the Bordor Lakes, and sail with Alexander Graham Bell. It's an incredible place to be.
Well, I think you've nailed it on the head, is that we do have the ports, what we call ports of confidence, where you can come in and the services are available, whether you're scheduled or unscheduled maintenance or repairs. There's those services available, but then you can go basically off grid.
Yeah.
Yes.
And disappear.
Yes.
And your cell phone probably won't work in certain spots.
It's the best of both worlds.
I love that part. I actually seek out those areas where the cell service is a little bit unavailable. So this is the Lunenburg working waterfront is a very special place. It's hard to replicate this environment because it is so authentic.
Mm-hmm.
And in current times, we're in the Lunenburg Shipyard, which is one of the most historic shipyards in the country, or even on the eastern seaboard of the continent. And it's attached to this working waterfront, where, as Captain Bill explained, you can get everything from traditional sail making to wire and rope working to modern fiberglassing and other techniques. But in the absence of a shipyard, it's really difficult to have a successful waterfront. So the shipyard went through a period recently where it was offline. And then it was now purchased recently by a very enthusiastic operator, and is back online as the Lunenburg Shipyard. And here we are in the shipyard on Bluenose II, which is it's so special to see. The Lunenburg has a tradition every December of having what they call Light Up Lunenburg, and they kicks off the holiday season, and Bluenose was all lit up. Can you talk to us about having a shipyard that can service your needs in the community where
in your home port?
It's tremendous for us. For us to go to the other ship. There's certainly other shipyards in Nova Scotia that can do the work. Very good shipyards in Pictou and Shelburne or Metagan. But for us to move the ship to there, we have to be fully kitted out. Right? We can't go down there with a box of sandwiches and a couple of buddies. And we're a commercial vessel, so we have to meet our safe manning and all the safety requirements. So for us to be able to just move down the waterfront and come here,
literally
is a huge thing. Broader than that, to have a shipyard here, there's certainly young people that have come here and set up marine service businesses to help support the shipyard. So there's two shipwrights local to here, like right next door to here, that do traditional woodwork. There's riggers that have come here and set up and are raising their families, and so you need a big operation like a shipyard that will help support and bring business to those smaller businesses.
So the yard acts almost as the foundation of the waterfront, and attracts those other services that you layer on, and then you become a marine service center.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what the Lunenburg has always been.
Oh, absolutely.
And
Yes.
with the shipyard in operation, and with the current operator looking to invest and grow the infrastructure, that'll only strengthen the waterfront and Nova Scotia as a global destination for recreation and service. So I know we're excited about it. We're very happy to see Bluenose doing your 10-year inspection.
Yes.
Here at the Lunenburg Shipyard. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about as far as marine services that the vessel has access to while
it's interesting. As part of recently we had the 100-year anniversary in 2021 of the original boat being launched. And so we look down and see sort of how we interact with the community around us. And we have like 45 businesses that we interact with on a regular basis. And that can be, from servicing our fire equipment or servicing the engines or groceries and sailmakers and the list goes on and on and on. And it's all done within an hour's drive of where we are.
Right.
Yeah. So that means the technicians.
Huge part of the community.
Yes. Yeah. So a lot of the technicians are local. A lot of the companies are local. So, if you want our BAs serviced or whatever, or our harnesses inspected, that all is done, 15, 20 minutes away. For us as a big commercial vessel with commercial needs, and to have that all within an hour's drive is just
amazing.
It's incredible. I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think it's a lot of time people will see a boat, whether it's a commercial boat or a pleasure yacht or a ship, and not fully understand the context of the tentacles of requirements that stretch so far into the communities as far as servicing the needs of the vessel. So these are real economic drivers, and being able to service them is just so critical. And then you have the ability for young families to move to your communities and participate in the marine economy. So I think we can't understate how important that is. But let's get back to exploring.
Yeah. So I want to know, do you have any advice for captains who are traveling to Atlantic Canada, maybe for the first time? I mean, you're very well traveled.
Yes.
Yes. Are there any not to miss experiences or ports that have to be on their itinerary that you can recommend?
It's so very hard. Yeah,
I know.
So, you can go to places like Pubnico, where there's just a massive fishing fleet, and the people there are just so welcoming, and the fishermen there are so welcoming, and you can just stand on the wharf and have real authentic conversations and talk about the fishing industry and what goes on there. There's always a challenge of the tides as you go around into the Bay of Fundy, but just staggeringly beautiful there.
Right.
And marine wildlife there is just off the map.
Yeah.
And then you come up into the eastern shore, which is much less populated. So one of our big lovely things during COVID was that we got to go to all these little places that we wouldn't normally get to go. So you go into a little harbor, and there's 7 houses there, and you watch the school bus come down, and one kid gets off, right? And the school bus drives back. You're at the end of the road, right? But this young guy is standing there with his book bag in his hand, and looking at the ship. Imagine the dreams he have. All the ships always, promote sort of the idea of what's over the horizon, but there's a mystery to them.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I love that, thinking of that. I hold that little kid in my heart, thinking that he's looking at us anchored out in the bay, and that he's wondering what's over the horizon, and maybe one day I could go and
sparks imagination. Yeah.
So Bluenose still evokes that sense of adventure.
I think so. Yeah.
Like
you definitely do.
This is
from the top down, right?
This is the coolest place we've ever done a podcast.
Okay,
let's just say that.
Why don't you describe where we actually are on board the ship?
Why don't you explain where we are?
That's the expert.
I mean, I could, but
put you on the spot there.
So we're sitting. If you look at the ship from the outside, we're in the interior between the 2 masts. So this is the officers' mess, where the officers, there's 6 of us that are full time to the ship. So we come back every year. This is where we hang out and have our meetings and do our planning. And really often the second mate is doing chart correction, so there's charts spread out all over the table here. And,
we've hid the peanuts. The peanuts are behind us. They're over in the corner now.
We found out what the favorite snack is on board. And so your crew complement when you're operational in the summer?
There's 20 of us. 20. Yeah, so 6 of us full time, and then 14 young people. And they're between the ages of sort of 19 and 26.
And they do 1 season each, right?
No, sometimes they'll come back 2 or 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah. It depends, on what we're doing, and sometimes we'll bump up the numbers that we bring back if we're going to have a sort of an aggressive year the following year.
Okay.
it's that, it costs money for us to train them because we put them through a marine emergency duties course and
Right.
the first marine first aid course. And so it's that fine balance of you want to bring that opportunity to as many people as possible.
Right.
Right. Because I know that one person that has that opportunity goes back into their community, and we'll talk about the ship and we'll change the lives of people around them. But we also want people here that have an idea of what they're doing.
Right.
What's the furthest place you've gone?
So in my time here on the ship, when Captain Walters was here, we were down into Panama.
Wow.
Recently, in 2019, just before COVID, we were up in the Great Lakes. So to the
Also another
Green
popular
Bay,
place for yachts to go?
Yeah, Kenosha. So that was, we're gone for 3 months and 5 or 6,000 miles, and we had 120,000 people across the decks. And
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, it's a tremendous pleasure to be here on board with you today. It's a unique experience to see the ship when it's being now having its annual type of servicing being done. We're just understanding how that all works.
I'm used to being on the upper deck, at a reception or on
bright blue
a
sunny
sail.
days,
Yeah.
and it's a bit of a foggy day here in Lunenburg. We are in December, so it's the off season. Before we kind of wrap up this awesome discussion, which I think we could
We could
talk
go on
all
forever,
day,
yeah.
I think. Could you give us maybe a bit of some of the funny questions you get asked by the public? This is, you said 120,000 people on board 1 year. What the big one that sticks out is, where did the term Bluenose come from? And Nova Scotians are known as Bluenosers, and this is a question we get asked all the time when we're at international boat shows and stuff. What's a Bluenoser?
Is it because it's cold there and your nose is blue?
Well, that's one of the stories that's often told, is that the fishermen wore blue mittens and they would rub their noses and the dye would come out.
The dye would come out, yeah.
But the curators of the museum tell us that's absolutely not true. And it's because we used to export a little blue potato. So you can still get blue potatoes. Maybe your parents
heard of blue potatoes, yeah.
I always call them purple potatoes.
Yes,
but
they're blue.
Purple noses.
Yes,
That's hard to
yeah. So they looked like little blue noses, and
okay.
I think that was.
I have not heard that one.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the
The
one
legit
we're
one.
going.
Yes,
Okay.
that's the one.
I call it the mitten story,
Yes, me
honestly.
too. The curators tell us that it's the potatoes.
And we definitely have to go with that. We are in the home of the Fisheries Museum of the Atlantic here in Lunenburg, which is another incredible attraction, and so they would know. Do any other kind of funny questions stand out?
In days gone by, before we all had Google or Maps or Apple Maps, and then you would be asked which piece of land was PEI and which was Newfoundland. And
right,
yes, we've been asked that as well. We actually met working at the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic.
Okay.
So we got questions about like George's Island. Is that Prince Edward Island?
Yes, exactly. So
yeah.
Where do you get licensed to hunt the tidal boar?
Oh, that is a good. I have not heard that one. So the tidal boar is the big wave that's formed in the Bay of Fundy during the tidal change, and so I have not heard that.
That's a great one.
Yeah.
Give us one more. Is one more from the archives?
I think that's probably
Those are the weirdest ones.
We'll get questions like, when are you going to put the sails up when the sails have been up for sort of 15 minutes and the engines have been off?
Okay, these are fun ones.
So it's one of those things you need to lift your head out of your phone a bit.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's what's special about when you step onto a tall ship. You are going back in time a bit and put those phones away and embrace that experience. I know when I was a very young person, I mentioned to you earlier, one of my cousins was on board as a sail trainee with Bluenose, and you were in Quebec, Cape Breton. I was able to join one of the sails, which Bluenose, when it's on its summer cruising schedule, does public tours and sailings, and we were screaming across the Bador Lake 14 knots under full sail.
That was a good sail.
And it etched in my mind. I think I was probably only 15 or 16 years old at the time, or somewhere around there. But it was a memory that I will take with me forever, and something I share with people when I travel.
It is, it's a tremendous opportunity to come onto a ship this size, and we day sail it. So you can come out for 2 hours, and we'll put the sails up, shut the engines off, and actually go sailing. So here in Lunenburg, quite often see porpoise and seals, and occasionally you'll see a shark or something, and you can sail out to the ovens, and it's an incredible experience that you can access a big ship sailing at a very reasonable cost and for a short term.
Yeah.
And for people who don't know, the ovens are natural caves.
Natural caves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're very, very beautiful.
There's lovely, in the bay out here, there's 2 lovely communities of Blue Rocks and Felsen South on each side of the bay. And it's a great place to sail. It's a great place to explore Nova Scotia and see the coastline.
Well, there's no better way to see Nova Scotia or Atlantic Canada than by boat. I think we're probably a little biased. But when you do experience our region by water, it's different.
Yes.
And when you approach the land and it emerges, that experience grows as you get closer. It's so diverse, the landscape, the people, the communities across this region. So as far as a yachting destination, again, biased, but we can't think of a better one. I'd like to kind of wrap up our interview today with just going back to your passion for boating. And I read somewhere, and I just love this. You kind of described your experience with Bluenose comparable to winning the Stanley Cup. And the Stanley Cup, for some of our listeners who don't know, it's the National Hockey League's major trophy. It's one of the coolest trophies in the world. But you equated it, the Bluenose, to sailing into your home community for the first time or coming back as bringing the equivalent of the Stanley Cup home.
Yeah. So I grew up in Mahone Bay. I was a little kid sailing a dinghy around there. If I wasn't at the yacht club, then I'd be out in my own boat with my brother, and so to get to sail, and we do often take the Bluenose back there. I can see myself right then and there as a little kid sailing around, and it's incredible. And so I often think of that as as when the guys get to take the Stanley Cup home to their hometowns and show it to their
sense
people,
of pride,
not their fans, but their community and the people that supported them.
I know.
It
gives me shivers.
Yeah, and then I also look at it. I picture myself here. I try and fashion myself as a caretaker of the icon. Right, this isn't my boat, and all of us here, we're caretakers of the icon. We're doing service for the community, for the province. So this is ours to look after. It's not ours. So I look at that and say, well, I'm like the guy that looks after the Stanley Cup.
Wow.
Yeah,
and the care that takes.
Yeah. And so when my son was first born, he was a couple of months old. I was living in Kingston, Ontario. My wife was at university. And the guy with the Stanley Cup went through town and found a dad and his kids playing hockey in the driveway. And he stopped and he took the Stanley Cup out. Right.
Because that's what it's all about.
That's right. Next goal wins.
No.
And
how many times as a kid have you said that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so I just, to me, that guy really understood what it is to be a caretaker of an icon and how important it is to, he probably had other stuff to do, but no, that story will be told in that family forever and ever and ever.
This is such a Yachting Canada episode.
This
is like Canadiana right here today.
It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you today. Thank you so much for inviting us on board Bluenose II while in the Lunenburg Shipyard in Lunenburg, Nova Scotia. We look forward to talking to you again when you're back in the water, under full sail, screaming across some body of water. Let's get her up to 16 knots. What is the top speed?
16 is the fastest she's ever been recorded at.
There you go. You did it.
16. Thank you again. This has been an incredible episode of Yachting Canada. I'm one of your hosts, Adam Langley.
And Amanda Langley.
And with us today again was Captain Phil Watson from Bluenose II, Canada's sailing ambassador. We hope you enjoyed this episode and stay tuned for more on Yachting International Radio. Thank you.